I am the torn, gnawed skin from Bull Connor's dogs. I am frostbite from camping on the plains of North Dakota protecting our sacred land and water. I am flame of a monk's self-emulation in the streets of Vietnam. I am a chorus singing revolution in Lithuania. I am the burned out Greyhound bus on its way to Birmingham. I am the remains found in an earthen dam in Neshoba County, Mississippi, 1964. I am chains, padlocks, handcuffs, locked on the bulldozers, drills, and gates. I am tree houses and aerial walkways to block the bulldozers. I am ropes, harnesses fastened to the tree limbs, resisting clear cutting. I am sitting on the rail tracks, standing across the interstates, blocking entrances, camping in the blast zone of mountain removal in West Virginia. I am trash stacked for the bonfire. I am sandals, immovable, staring down the rifle barrels of the militia in Indonesia. I am matches burning draft cards. I am blood splattered on the files at the General Electric nuclear plant. I am jars filled with poison water held up for everyone to see. I am media tell the truth written on placards. I am the cello playing Requiem for a Dead Planet. I am the body language of the Extinction Rebellion's choreography, red paint signals on hands. I am children lying down in the street remembering all those who died in school shootings. I am a knife cutting the vast trawler nets, ensnaring the dolphins and humpback whales. I am stomachs that will not surrender to hunger in a jail cell in Northern Ireland or Israel. I am eyes that look out on the world and see the violence of injustice. I am arms gripping packages swinging side to side in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square. I am shoulders lifting children in the marches. I am smoking tear gas canisters hurled back at the police. I am bandanas covering the mouth. I am bare feet facing boots. Protester, a poem which I wrote in May of 2017. Good evening, my name is Charles Carr and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaborative program between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and Philly Cam. The focus of our program is to give our viewers the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia, and to understand there are many different venues and ways in which one can come to love poetry in the city of Philadelphia. There are special poetry events. There are poetry readings every week. Moonstone Arts presents a reading just about every Wednesday night at Fergie's Pub. There are organizations that print poetry journals and books of poetry, Moonstone being one of them. So on any given night in Philadelphia, there is some venue that is available to love poetry, to listen to poetry. So tonight, Philly Loves Poetry will feature a discussion between two really loved poets in Philadelphia, Cynthia Dewi Oka and Eleanor Wilmer. The focus of the discussion will be regarding a poetry that explores replication versus responsibility. They'll explore why these two concepts are paired as opposite, how focus on their opposition rises from the current situation, how poetry's language and practice responds to the world in ways that fend off mimicry, open the mind, break the frame, elude the filters that falsify and occlude vision. The discussion will be free-willing, so as with poems, they can't really know where it will take them. They will also talk about the tensions between the writing that makes a life and a system that disseminates support, poetry, and making a living. And before I introduce our two guests, I want to say Philly Loves Poetry is very happy and very proud to be part of the digital rally on behalf of the Philadelphia Arts, which is speaking up in opposition to the defunding of arts and culture in the city of Philadelphia. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Cynthia and Eleanor and let them begin their conversation. I know you'll enjoy it.
I will give the sort of title that we gave Charles to introduce us. which is replication and responsibility. So let's just jump in there. Okay, put us back together. Cynthia, come in. Leave us together, if you would, Sergio, because this is a conversation. So we have a few questions that we've built this around, but anything can happen, so stay tuned. So the first question we're looking at is, what do we mean by each of the terms replication versus responsibility in relation to poetry? Because poetry is our thing here. Why have we put these two things together? It's an odd pair. And why does this opposition, one against the other, come to mind at this moment in history? I'd like to just say one word about replication just to get us started. As I know Cynthia's had a long day. And what I was thinking of, because my mind tends to like drift into mythologies, was Echo and Narcissus. The lover of Narcissus was a nymph who had been punished by never being able to do anything except mimic the voice she heard. And so Echo is the one who loves Narcissus. So self-love and those who echo that particular stance. So it was already there built into the myth, the particular problem with mimicry and what draws people to it. So Cynthia, you want to talk about the pair and about responsibility, whatever. Go for it.
Go for it. I think first, maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself for folks who may not know who I am. My name is Cynthia Dewi, and I'm a poet.
Cynthia, let me introduce you. I'm sorry, because Charles is gone.
Wait, I wanted to introduce you.
All right, introduce yourself. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
And I'm a poet. I am currently based in South Jersey, Lenape land, and I'm originally from Indonesia. My family migrated to Canada when I was 11, and so then we lived there for some time, and I came this way south of the border about 8 years ago now, so it's been a while. And I'm really happy to be here with Eleanor to talk about these different issues that usually we would have this conversation over sushi together. But Eleanor Wilmer is, she's a very celebrated, accomplished poet, was faculty also for a long time at Warren Wilson, where she literally organized me to apply. And it was some of the best couple of years of my life. And and I just really deeply admire Eleanor for her integrity, for her clarity, for her gifts as a poet. She has such an eye for other beings. I feel like there's something incredibly otherworldly and also at the same time very grounded in the history and politics and ethics of our time. So she's like a timeless poet for me, someone that whose work you can just kind of return to over and over again. So I'm really grateful to be here to talk about whatever it is that we're going to talk about with Eleanor. And on this question around replication and responsibility, I think we started talking about it because of just, the digital era has really proliferated. I think from my perspective, the way I think about it is just, it's really proliferated imagery everywhere. So recently I taught a class at Bryn Mawr this past fall. And one of the first things we talked about, is poetry as often a vehicle of image and feeling still necessary, because we are so inundated with images all the time. And one of the distinctions actually that we made was this question of mimicry, which is how much of the imagery that we consume today are just literally they they just mimic and echo each other back and forth.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like a house of mirrors
Yes.
effect that happens.
Echo chamber. Yes.
Yes. And what does that do, you know, I think for our subjectivity, for our consciousness as readers, and also as people who work in the craft. And it's really interesting because one of the things we talked about was the distinction between replication and repetition, because repetition is something that actually can lead to transformation. Like if you are trying to start a new habit, you have to do it over and over again before it sinks in. But there's something about the replicative kind of methodology by which we circulate, by which we communicate with each other right now, that can often like trap our imagination. And in particular, you know, images that are like really violent, and how then that also like normalizes that kind of, that degree of violence in our lives, and makes it something that's more and more palatable, because it's literally everywhere, even though it is enacting a violence on us every time we consume it. So I think that's something that we were thinking about, and responsibility for me. You know, I think it's interesting. It's like on one hand, the events of the last couple of weeks have really made me, and not just me, you know, like so many people ask, like, is this what it takes for people to respond? Like, how many Black people do you have to see die violently? I mean, what happened to George Floyd was literally an echo of what happened to Eric Garner, right? And it's like
same words, yes,
and exact same words, and it's like, and is that, and this is something I think that white America really has to contend with. It's like, is that the threshold? Is that the threshold that's required to sustain an act of like self-reckoning, and in order to demand something better from yourself? Because like right now, the uprisings are having incredible effects. Like people are having these conversations in their homes, people are having these conversations in their workplaces. Anti-Blackness is being exposed everywhere. And it's like happening at such a huge toll on Black communities. And as non-Black people, I think that is the question, not just like for white people, but I think also for people of color who are not Black. It's like, we really have to ask the question, like, that can't be the bar. Yes. That can't be the bar for us to act like that. And that's the framing for me around like responsibility. It's like, it is on us to study. It is on us to figure out what is it going to take to stay committed to the struggle.
What is it going to take? The reason I wanted to respond to that, Cynthia, is because I want to read something. I forget who said this. I write things down on little scraps. I don't know where the hell I found it, but it not only took another instance of this kind of cold-blooded murder, but it also took a pandemic.
That's right.
That's important. And let me read this because it says it better than I can in a minute. The pandemic added its own accelerant to the mix. For roughly 3 months before Mr. Floyd's death, Americans were living in a state of hypervigilance and anxiety, coping with feelings of uncertainty and vulnerability and fear, things Black Americans experience on a daily basis. So I think we need to put that in, that it took that.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. Whoops. We have just lost our image.
Oh, really? I can still see you.
I can't see you. There, I started to get octopuses made of color. I thought, oh my, we haven't even gotten to the poetry yet. So Yes. So let's talk maybe about the replication of images, as you said. That was another question we thought. I wanted to quote William Blake here. They became what they beheld. And the question from that is, what is the effect of replicating certain kinds and victims of violence over and over? And in fact, until this moment, it didn't bring about great change, though there were other protests, but then it would go underground again. Given the need not to remain silent, what are some of the ways that poetry can confront atrocity without replicating it, without just making us watch another Black man be killed in front of our eyes until that's the image burned into our brain? That's what happened to Black people.
Mm-hmm.
This is a terrible result of replication. So how can we speak of it? How can we bring it to people's attention in a way that will not draw us into the vortex of repetition, replication? You're right, repetition is a power, like waves. Every wave is different.
Right.
Energy is passing through. This is we're talking about mimicry of a terrible image. Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? I have some thoughts, and I'm sure you do.
I think that, there is so much, I feel like in so many ways, like politically, because the other thing I should mention is, like, I'm an organizer, so I've organized actually longer than I have been a poet. And so political kind of engagement and political participation has always, for my adult life, has been a really important question of, like, how to participate as, like, an other in a place that sees me as foreign and or contextless. And I think that it has really been, like, Black organizers, Black thinkers, Black artists who have politically, philosophically, also, like, emotionally raised me through relationships, but also through books, through art. And what I have, and it's really interesting because I think many poets, of my generation, like, when I read people's reflections or, like, some of the struggles that people had, it seems that because many people's paths were through academia, and this is not for everyone, but, like, the path through academia, like, exposed them to just, like, the white canon. And then there's, like, this decolonizing work that many people had to do afterwards. So, like, kind of, like, learn the suppressed histories and voices that they were not exposed to. And because of the circumstances in my life and the work that I was doing, I felt that for me, that was actually my starting point, was like the places that were suppressed. And I feel really grateful for that. Because I think what it allowed me to see was, what it allowed me to experience was to be exposed to the full range of, like, humanity. And it's like, it's not just through the lens of violence, if that makes sense, and racist violence, which is what gets play, what gets replicated in the media, and what also traps the American imagination, so that even progressive, quote unquote, imagination, the way that, like, even mainstream liberal white imagination will think of what, that's the picture that they have of a Black person, is of a violated Black person, if that makes sense, and of violated brown people, and of the violated global South, and, like, how can we be, like, a better people in relationship to these people who are being victimized, etc. But, like,
it's a trap.
Yes. Exactly. But, like, that means that that's all that they're actually imagining, when actually there's, like, such a wealth of experience and thought and complexity and contradictions. And it's like, all, like, reading Robert Hayden was so seminal for Gwendolyn Brooks. Oh my God, what a mind! You know,
Right.
and
But that's so much the important.
there, like, you know, but it's just like the wholeness of the world is in the art and literature. Actually, if we're honest about what's out there, but what gets replicated is like this fraction and not this, and then people have to like go and search for like the rest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I keep getting the image of a gated community, and that's the mind of the one.
Right.
The students in Japan described themselves as frogs in a well because they were so insular that all they could see was that little circle of blue, and they were like the frogs in a well. And that's what you were saying is so important, because what's happened is those voices that you were hearing, that richness of the human scale of possibilities, is now our poetry has opened to it and is enriched. I think that's changing, because the voices, I saw the list of signatures, I saw the names against the foundation thing. Anyway, the point is that I think that's entering our poetry now in a major way. The mainstream used to keep people on the margins. I think of them as drying by the banks, because I mean the pun. But that's changed. That's changed. And now when new voices come in, the eyes of those half or three-quarter blind eyes are changing, there's no doubt. Can I read a little poem by Ross Gay? This is an example of what happens when you hear from the community itself. You get a different view. Instead of seeing a man who is once again victimized, you see something quite different. I just want to read this, if I may. It's called A Small Needful Fact. Is that Eric Garner worked? Oh, I'm sorry. I should go back and read the title and connect it to the first line. Please excuse me. A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. It's a gorgeous poem. Inspiration means to breathe in. And by bringing this man to life, you see not someone who is a victim and violent, but someone who has planted something to help us breathe. The irony of the end is powerful, but it's the kind of irony that puts us in the presence of the thing unsaid. And that's so important, because it makes desecration real by making the sacred something you talk about with a holy fear. And so you don't show the violence. What you do is show the human being. And by giving us, making it easier for us to breathe as the plant puts out oxygen, what can you say about it? It's as good as what the poem does. So it's all about that experience. I don't think anyone but Ross Gay could have written that poem. And now he's one of our major poets. He's in the middle of it. No more margins. Because always, I used to tell students years ago, if you want to find something real that you don't know about, and our responsibility and accountability is to the real, look at the periphery. Don't look where you're supposed to see, but look at the edges, because that's where it is. Anyway, so we have more questions. Uh-oh. This screen goes off and on. How is poetry a way of knowing? Why are we compelled to write? Do you want to talk a little, Cynthia, about the poet's practice and then the tension of the making of poetry with the making of living? If poetry gives us a life, we also have to make a living. There's a terrible tension there that you were talking about the other day. So would you talk to us about that? You're in the midst of it. I'm just an old broad here.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually related to something you were saying earlier about how there's so many more, yes, there are so many more voices of color now than before. And I think it's still a very small percentage, actually, if we look at how people are published. Like I know fiction is incredibly white, for example, just like what the chances are for people to get published, because it's so much pegged to what publishers think audiences will like in the future, right? So like the way that we imagine, the way that like publishers are thinking about readership is very much tied to who they think the nation is and who they think read, right? And who they think will have the money to buy the books, etc. So, and these kinds of considerations are racialized and they are classed, right? So it's kind of like how, I mean, okay, like maybe this is like a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like there's an analogy here. So the way that like people, that bankers who were looking for families and for individuals to exploit with subprime mortgages looked for bad credit, and how bad credit was actually an index of people's race and people's class, right? And I think that actually that kind of colonial mentality is really deep-seated, continues to be deep-seated in many of the establishments of literature today. And there are like many writers who are much more astute on this point, have done a lot of their research on this. I have not actually, because of just the reality of my life, I have such limited time to engage. And so the time that I protect for myself on a daily and weekly basis for the writing is just to write. Right. So so at this moment, and it's not ideal because I feel like I would love to be engaged on a larger level, because I think that it's important to fight these fights. And I want to get to a point in my life where I can be more involved in these larger fights to change the landscape of how we think about who is the ideal reader, who is the reader that we're thinking about. And also, you know, like a lot of writers of color are paid significantly less. Like, I mean, this is just, I mean, it's like it's from Hollywood to Ivory Tower to like all the major publishing houses. There's like this trend happening on Twitter right now where like various, where writers are reporting what publishing paid them, and the disparities are like stark. So, the reason I kind of went there with this question is because I am compelled to write, because writing is how I investigate the world, how I figure out my place in it, and also its place in me. You know, it's like, how do I love that. I think it was Denise Levertov actually who said it. It was just like poetry is like a way of reconciling with the world. So I'm like paraphrasing that. And I think that's really, poetry is how I stay here. So that's what compels me to write. And because of the reality that I was talking about earlier, there are real significant economic considerations. You know, like we live in a country that does not provide healthcare for its people. We live in a country where people don't have paid sick leave. So these are, and I'm a parent, I'm a mom. So I have to think about also livelihood for my child and college and all of these things. And it's hard. It's hard, you know, to like protect your time, protect your imagination, protect your hope, protect the fire that compels you to write when it feels like everything is stacked up to put it out. In the real world.
You call that the pressure to assimilate, which is a really good phrase because it's so much a part of American culture because everybody came from somewhere else and tried to homogenize themselves to become something else. A lot of people, when they first came, were in pain too and couldn't bear to look back at the lost world, the lost tongue, everything, and the violence they came from, and so forth. So many Americans have no history that way, which is my mind just went somewhere else. We really need to talk about the connection between, because when you're talking about economics, the way you write is the opposite of capitalism. We can't we can never command our imaginations to do anything. We have to relinquish the power. We're not in control in the other way. We're not in competition with, and the mind must serve the awareness, the whole being. So in some fundamental way, we're out of sync with a culture. And if they're asking you for certain things, you can't ask your imagination to lie. That's the responsibility that you can't even interfere with, because the real is what it responds to. I really would like to talk about the connection between racism and capitalism, because I was thinking about, I don't know how much time we have, I would love to read a poem by Diane Gilliam if we have time. This is Kettlebottom, is about the Madawan mine wars of the 1920s. And there's a poem in there that's fantastic. But let me just say one thing about this, because if we don't have time, I won't, but I'd rather read this than my stuff.
Please do.
What I want to say about this is she was reading from this at Warren Wilson, the graduation. She read, the poems are all in the voices of the wives of miners, the children, and the miners themselves. They are at war with the owners. They have to buy their food in the company store. They're dying because there's no protection for the workers, and they are closed into the mines when the mines fall, or they die of black lung disease, whatever. She's writing in the dialect of the people because she's a member of that community of the out-migration from West Virginia. So she reads some of these. They're powerful, they're tragic, and they are about people who are being crushed by owners. At the end of her reading, we had a young black woman from the Midwest came up to her and said, "Oh, Diane, you people have your stories too." That was such a profound moment because we have been divided from each other. The poor white people are being played with this business about, oh, you're white. And so that's the blacks are the enemy, the blacks are the blacks, the blacks. Whereas they have been divided from the other working people who are being crushed by the same forces, but don't see who the enemy is. And so it's the old divide and conquer thing. There's a book I read, I think in 1950 or 60, called The Mind of the South by William Cash, which explained how that system built itself. Okay, you're poor and you're white, but you can come in the front door, and the other guy, he has to come in the back. And they're still living on that identity. And Donald Trump is still playing that. And they're not looking at who it is that has the hands around their neck. I mean, those policemen who are turned loose, the bad ones, they're working for someone. And could I ask you, whoop, we're gone again. Could I ask you, Cynthia, if you would read one of your poems, and maybe I'll read one of Diane's, but would you read the poem, the one about the Hurricane Sandy, because I think it's about that division and property. Is that okay? Are you up for that? Okay. I've lost your voice. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, there you are. Okay, go.
Great.
Yeah.
After Hurricane Sandy, we climbed toward the rumored grave of a Native American healer, the earth, a vertigo of blackness and exposed root beneath our palms, pressing up through the waves of molten leaves, toward the bluff where our children, having for the past hour pretended not to hear our demands for them to come down, are now balancing their sunlit, baby fat, all but gone bodies on a thin shelf of rock. Look, it's a deer in a wolf's face. Their cries tumble down, snagging like runaway rags on the branches. They look like Brutus and Cassius, debating the fate and meaning of a red stain the size of a man etched into granite, commanding the speech of minerals. They found a myth worth more than their mother's fear. The wind makes a bear of me, gristling my chest and thighs as I crawl, gravity inhaling me like an enormous throat over the deadness of trees and thorned bushes, knuckles bursting like berries, thoughts detritus around a New York Post article I read about a woman who, weeks ago, her brain sweaty with prayer, climbed the rope of her body, her black body, up the steepest mountain in America, which rose between the door of her car, where her children rocked each other in the arms of the storm, and the door of the house she knocked and knocked, until her knuckles burst into mouths, her body a black tongue, a root burning against which the family in the living room dryly surveyed their possessions. Fine china, paintings collected over the years, utensils gleaming in candlelight, the life-size television, their window into loss and destruction, which is silent now, their sleeping Noah. The door did not open. The animals in the house survived, while two baby boys washed away, their screams become the molted skin of water as it bucked, roiled against its own vanishing empire, claiming for days a solid mass, blitzkrieg of porches and tire swings, of libraries, the vowels of a child's eyes looking up at the body that broke open for him and keeps breaking, like a faulty dam, even after water returns to water, lifting like souls in sunlight to form the clouds that now drift above us, waiting their turn to kiss the mouth of a forgotten grave, the red of a mother's heart. I hold my son to me, I breathe him and try to witness the miracle of leaves still clinging to branches, scrawling their petitions on the November breeze, even as we stare at our knuckles, the ripe strength of them, on this precipice we have been led to in the wake of the flood, asking the gods, which do we raise them to be, deer or wolf? The dead give nothing away.
Thank you. You know, we have both in us, as that poem shows, the deer and the wolf. The wolf was meant to protect the deer. We've got to get that right someday. But that door did not open. We have been divided from each other by property, by the owners, who get a great deal out of that. I want to read one poem and then ask Cynthia to read another because we'll be soon out of time. I just want to read this one poem. It's an older one. It comes from 2 years I spent in Japan, and before I went, I found myself very much afraid. And I realized that the source of that fear, and it was great, was that I had been a child during World War II, and the Japanese had been demonized in the most effective manner. And so I was caught in that. In fact, I think it was the images of the Hiroshima maidens that started me as a writer, and knowing that everything I had been told was a lie. And somehow we have to see, it's that thing about responsibility to what's going on out there, which nothing I was told covered in any way. The only thing that has changed in the long life I've had has been the name of the enemy. But the pattern continues, and it always serves the powerful and the wealthy. This poem goes around in circles. It's two women who are walking the path around a moat that surrounds a garden that surrounds the emperor's palace, which sits in the middle of Tokyo. And this emperor was the old man. He was the Showa emperor. This was the 80th year of his reign. He had been the emperor during the war. Ume, plum. Fruit is small and often served shriveled, soaked in some attar or other, an odd shade of red, weak and toward the blue. Sometimes one of these unpromising tiny plums is set in the center of a flat bed of white rice to mime the nation's flag, red sun on a white field. Those years ago we never knew, kept ignorant of all that might disable war, that the flag with the wide red rays that rose over the bodies adorned the Zero's wings was a war flag, emblem of a burning sun, like rage or whatever it is that sets men's lives at naught and pours them young and hot down history's drain. The trees here must be bred for the beauty of their flower, for the plums are sour, the cherries small and bitter, but oh, the ume blooming in the early spring, the sakura unfolding in a brilliant sky, blossoms borrowing the light for shelter. A glowing parasol of pink and white, or the world a child's globe that sits in the Buddha's hand, and when he laughs, it shakes until the air is filled with silken snow, the wind toying with it, lifting the petals as if back to the branch, then bringing them lightly down. Walking the shimmering tunnel of flowering trees along the imperial moat, Mrs. Nakano and I spoke of the war when we were both children, the same age, I think, though it was a point of pride with her to never say. Her voice was matter of fact, or else it was the way English goes flat in a mouth made for another tongue. In Kobe, she had crouched with her mother in the bomb shelter while our planes bombed her city flat. The trees shivered a little. The delicate arbor sent down a shower of petals to our feet. The carp, grown huge, slid by in the moat, and the rain began steady. We opened our umbrellas as we went. She spoke then about her husband, her misery with him, his anger, and his mother, the doors that one by one she tried and found them locked. How do we keep from going mad, I thought, looking at the trees bred for their beauty by an aesthetic breed of men who wanted a woman wrapped in tissue-thin silk, her mouth a hole with blackened teeth, who would dive at the dark stack of a ship to a fiery death. And so with them our own young men, the same, filing into the black belly of a huge cargo plane, each with a woman in his wallet, her words on lilac paper, her distant image as his aphrodisiac in hell. I tried to ask the question that can't be asked in words, having no subject and no predicate, but death. I thought of the bombs falling, and then my mind went blank as the radar screen when a thing that moves into its range is much too close. We're gone. And Mrs. Nakano and I, the fortunate ones, walked side by side beneath the cherry trees and watched the great smoking craters of memory fill in and disappear, and watched the rain turn the fallen petals into a sticky debris, and walked because we were alive, and walked to keep from going mad, and walked for beauty and for company. The whole perimeter of the Emperor's Moat, that carp-infested fence around the palace, walled in, where power keeps its face and ends as history ends in Lear. King Lear, old, heart-sore, the dead Cordelia in his arms. Reverse Pieta, a motherless world, the father holding the sacrificed child on a ground of fallen petals wet with rain, plum on a field of white. But here we break the circle, cross the street, and bow. We part, Mrs. Nakano and I, go each to her own gate. I think we have time for one more poem. Would you close us with a poem? And then with your pitch. I think there's time for both. How to watch the act of killing, and do you want to say something about the Bali? I think we have 5 full minutes.
I am so sorry. I'm getting to unmute. Actually, I was wondering if I would love to hear from, instead of reading another poem, I actually would really love to hear from you, Eleanor, like what, because the thing is, like, you have a long view, right? Like you are at a point in your life where you have a long view of like just
like it or not. It's the older thing. Yeah. Right.
I think it's you know, I would love to hear as a member of the younger generation who is really inspired by you. Like what do you feel hopeful for in this moment? Like in wearing your poet hat, like, you know, as a poet.
As of this moment, well, things are moving. Things are moving, and when things are moving, there's life. And when there's life, there is hope. And I think hope has short wings. You have to keep it close. One of my favorite poets is Tim Siebel's, and he has a line who says, someone should hold a note for the earth. I mean, it's like the pandemic shows us we're connected. The problems on the planet now show us we're connected. Shakespeare said, how with his rage shall beauty hold free? Her strength is no stronger than a flower. The earth, I would say, argues for the flower. And I think I would just like to end with a couple of lines from the end of the long poem that was really stupid. In her hand, with a golden I said, nothing else, God, what is this? And she said, that's a cow. And that means one face. So our difference, the West glory, her culture wanted to say face. They were in it, but they were both. looking at another Miss Flower. So let me read the end of this poem. It's just a few lines. At Nagasaki, in the center of the blast, there is a glade so dense with foliage, bushes, asakal, and pine, you'd almost miss the sign, hand-drawn, the only one in English that I saw. They said nothing would grow here for 75 years, and though the language was my own, I found it difficult to read through such a thick, exquisite screen of evergreen and tears. Would you say a word about your campaign, please, before we go back to Charles?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I come from Bali, Indonesia, and for many reasons, neo-colonialism, my island has been dependent on tourism for decades, for people like for people's livelihood. And as a result of COVID and the airport being shut down and nobody allowed in and out, there's just been a huge economic impact on Bali and on the people of Bali. And an immediate problem is just food shortage. So I am working with one of the village councils there who's trying to help folks get back on their feet, provide food, high quality food, and also help people create fish farms and also plant their own food to create food security in the long run. So if you would like to donate, I'm actually going to be sending donations like this week. And if you would like to Venmo me your donation, I'm at Free Dewi. So at FREEDEWA. Thank you.
It's been great.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Cynthia.
All right.
Charles.
Well, I finally have appeared from outer space, and but I was able to get pick up the program, and it was just I felt it was extraordinary, even though the audio was problematic. And I would say to you, I would love to have another bite at this apple, again in this conversation between the two of you, because it's really, to me, and I'm sure to our listeners, our viewers, this is poetry answering what is the current dilemma. And this is the way arts can respond to it. I don't think people really appreciate or realize that. So it was wonderful that we were able to launch this, actually as a part of the digital rally to support or resist the defunding of the arts and culture in Philadelphia. So I really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time. We were able to get this on the air. As I always do, I have to make a pitch for Moonstone. And see, I come from a place where I'm now the president of the Moonstone board. And I can tell you that Moonstone is really one of the major cultural organizations in the city of Philadelphia in bringing the love of poetry in so many different venues. But I'll be honest with you, I don't know no longer how we can continue to do that if we don't get support. There's many people that have been involved with Moonstone, poets, artists, etc. And I'm telling you, if you're out there and your friends, you really have to step up another level in starting to support us, because it's not going to be going on. And I can tell you that Moonstone has really been supported by the deep pockets of one person, and that's Larry Robbins, who is really an angel, to the culture in Philadelphia. I don't know how long that can continue. So I'm putting it out there. We need support, and we're going to be coming up with ways to reach out to the broader Philadelphia cultural community to help support us. But the important thing is that we have a show like this. And I'm so proud, that I'm part of it. I'm so proud that I was able to host you two, even though I've been in hyperspace for a while, but I did get to see the program, and I thought it was extraordinary. I think it was a program that really people needed to listen to. So thank you again, and I'll see you in real time.
I see
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.